The roll call.
Okay, Member Fasoon is absent. Member Hodges is absent. Member Larson?
Here.
Member Lieberman is absent. Member Melgen?
Here.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Here.
Chair Mohammed?
Here. Now on to the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. We can now move on to the approval of minutes.
Does anyone have any questions or comments on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, just a moment. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes. Now we can move on to public comment for any public members wanting to speak on an item not on the agenda.
Appears we don't have any public comment.
All right. Thank you. We will now go on to the next item, which is announcements.
Okay, I have two announcements for today. The first is that the heat pump rebate program received another round of funding from the council in their February 5th meeting, I believe, the early February meeting. They adopted the recommendation of the committee, which was to increase the funding by $75,000, to increase the moderate income rebate to $3,000 and the low income rebate to $6,000. So those amounts have been added and updated, and the program is continuing. And then my second announcement, I'm going to share my screen for just a moment. Just wanted to announce that Stop Waste is offering grants to businesses and nonprofits for waste prevention. There's a pretty wide variety of potential activities that are eligible for grants, all forms of waste prevention that you can imagine, and they're really looking for creative ideas. They're offering, I think, up to $30,000 per grant, something between $10,000 and $30,000, and the deadline is due on March 14th. So if you or someone you know or a business you like might have an idea or maybe is already doing something to prevent waste, please spread the word. You can find out more at stopwaste.org/grants. Any questions?
Do you have some announcements about new hires?
New hires? Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. We do have 2 new hires in our department. We have one new planner named Mira, who is working on the housing element as well as other kinds of building and planning projects. And then we also have a new transportation planner named Ben, who is more closely on the team with Sutton and I. He's working on a whole range of transportation-related projects, including the active transportation plan that you heard about at this committee a couple months ago. And those hirings are part of a larger sort of reshuffling of the staff in our department to cover some of the projects that Lizzie used to work on while she was here. So we've all done a little bit of musical chairs, and now we're more staffed up. Any other questions? I think we do have public comment. If you want to open it.
Let's open up to public comment.
First public comment, you may begin.
Greetings, Climate Action Committee members and staff. This is Nick Peterson with Albany Climate Action Coalition. Very, very exciting about the renewal of the heat pump air handling system rebates for conditioning buildings. I think that's a really excellent program. I'm also glad you made more categories and increased the amount for low income. One thing I would strongly recommend is that the program require a minimum number, sort of hold those. It might take longer to get them rolled out, but we need to somehow do more outreach and get more folks of low and moderate income benefiting from that, so they don't all go to people that really are probably capable on their own of doing it. So I get a little worried that the program isn't providing it to, equitably to lower income. And then it's exciting to hear new hires, but this sounds like it's into community development. And I really think climate action needs its own dedicated 100% of the time person coordinating and doing that work and not scattering it all around the different departments where it gets a little stovepiped in what's happening in communication has problems. So I'd recommend getting a new hire on that. Thank you very much.
Appears that's all public comment.
All right. If there are any comments about the announcements? If not, we can move on to the next item, which is discussion and possible action.
Next item, so we don't have any presentations tonight, so yeah, we'll move along to 6.1, which is the climate emergency declaration. And I can go ahead and share that on my screen, but I'll leave it to the subcommittee to talk about it.
Well, there's some controversy about it, but the three of us on the committee, Troy, Katie, and I, are happy with 95% of it. I think it's a good piece of work. The last part has numbers in it. It says if your alternative is driving a car, you can avoid 0.6 pounds of CO2 per mile by doing something that is non-fossil, walking, taking BART, whatever, or driving an EV. There's also numbers in there on the amount you could save by installing a heat pump in a representative Albany home. And then there's also one about how many pounds per person for flying a round trip to Boston. My belief is that with more information, people generally tend to make better decisions. I think in particular of, this kind of came up because my daughter talked to me about the people in her book club, and they're all financially, well, I don't want to go into too much, but basically all of them, all 5 of them, said they'd really like a checklist, some guidance. Where can we get a big reduction? They would all like to know, well, if I can afford an EV or a heat pump, which is better? That kind of question. And that motivated me to write this. I read a piece by Severin Borenstein, who writes constantly about climate stuff, and he wrote early last year actually, about how shocked he was by the emissions from a jet flight, because he flies to conferences all the time. He had no idea that it was so high. So that's why that's in there. So the numbers are there to help Albany citizens figure out where they're really making, where they can really make a positive impact. So I really like that, but I invite the other members of the committee to make their comments.
Presenting for the opposition. No, we workshopped this paragraph a lot, and Mark came back with language that I really liked, sort of bracketing the paragraph, because it does now call out all kinds of actions you can take, whether you are able to reduce your emissions by taking transit or taking an EV, you know, that's the original version of this did not include those steps, and now it does. And I really love the concluding sentence of this paragraph as well, where it says, you know, the city urges each resident to choose collective or individual steps. Because I think that's what we're trying to do with this document, is like not just totally boilerplate and move on, but a call to arms kind of thing. So I like that part of the language. However, in this sort of a document, I don't really expect to see the detail and the numbers. It doesn't sort of, for me anyway, tonally go with the declaration of emergency. It is stylistically not like the rest of the document as well. And it sort of invites debate, which is, I think, not what we're trying to do. Like, not that we're trying to be non-controversial, but we're not trying to like get into bickering over details about whether it's better to take your bike or switch to an EV or whatever. Like we could do that all night. And I feel like generally we're trying to just inspire action rather than debate. So that's in the, like, I would say my preference would be actually to include aspects of this paragraph, but not the parts with the actual numbers. So in retrospect, I suppose I should have written an alternative paragraph for us to think about. But anyway, the three options that we could consider here are the declaration up to this last paragraph is option one. And did everyone get time to read it already, or do you want to take time to read it? Anyway, option two would be include this paragraph. And then option three would be include this paragraph and excise the specific numbers from the paragraph, but keep the rest of it. Did you guys have time to read it? No? Okay. Troy, did you want to say anything about it?
Sure. I think on my side, I have similar views to Katie in that I feel that, I guess for this document, it's a little more of a high-level kind of call to action, and the numbers themselves are a little stylistically different than the rest of the document. However, I guess I do want to say I think it's important that we come to recommending this to City Council with as unanimous support as we can. And I wouldn't want to see that get fractured over, one paragraph of the document, where otherwise I think we're highly in alignment of what we want to see from this. So I think for where I stand, if kind of taking out the numbers would result in us not having a unanimous decision, I'm good to move forward with them, as I think overall it's a really good document.
Thanks, you guys. Just for clarity, because this is a little bit unusual, that was the presentation from the subcommittee that we just heard. Now we'll have questions to the subcommittee, public comment, and then discussion, just so we all are on the same page.
All right, any questions?
Yeah, was the intent on that to give sort of just, the idea of practical examples, so making it a little bit more real, or was it to the actual numbers trying to push people further in conviction on that? So my question is was the intent for this to be providing practical examples of what people can do, or was it to be more provocative and swaying on you should take action?
I'm not sure how to answer that. Part of the problem with numbers in some areas is that there's such a range. For example, if you take the bus, well, is it a fossil fueled bus? Or is it running on green hydrogen or hydrogen that's not, all of those sorts of things. So there's plenty of, and then, changing your diet, well, how much does that reduce CO2 per year? You can come up with a lot of plausible numbers. So these three are here partly because they're big. That's the real main reason. And the other is that they're amenable to quantification. And again, the idea is to provide guidance. Not everybody is fortunate enough to do any one of these three. But for people who are fortunate enough, you might say they're part of the problem. They're the people who are driving cars a lot and so on. And if they want to be part of the solution, these are three big things that some fortunate people can do.
Any other questions? If not, we can move on to public comment.
Great. The first public comment may begin.
Yeah, greetings. Nick Peterson with Albany Climate Action Coalition. Again, really applaud you guys for putting this effort in. Thank you so much. I think this is going to be a very important document to the city, and frankly, I support it pretty much however you go through. I mean, some of the things I really like is the urgency, and what I really appreciate about how it was put together is that it really starts at the top with saying, urgent action to secure a stable future, and then there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity. That's super important. And Albany is specifically threatened. I'm reading certain highlighted areas I picked out in this. Prioritize climate, and that the general plan prioritizes climate concerns. So these are all really critical things the city is saying needs to happen in the city, within city government, city operations, and also the city itself as far as residents. So immediate action by residents to transition away from natural gas, heating, fossil fuel as quickly as possible. That the city is literally requesting that of people. It's great. Community-led climate action, prioritizing broad. I love all these statements, but then you get to the last paragraph, and I really appreciate what Mark's trying to do, give people, a kernel to take away. I know I'm going to go ahead and do this, but it gets lost in the 0.6 pounds and the whole thing. And what I find is when you start looking at what you can do as an individual, you get very depressed, because individually we can make very little impact, but collectively we can make the most. So I would almost, I would be okay with leaving this in if it was more like the earlier one where Albany actually, I'm missing the exact quote that I was looking at, but that they really, we're going to set policy and assign resources to do this correct, and that people do that on their own too. So something like Albany urgently, I don't know if request is the right word. I mean, it encourages or sees the need for all residents to take collective action. I just think this sentence, it's too, hey, we ask, and here's some things you can do, and a little bit of CO2 here, and you can do this and that, and it sort of waters down the urgency. So and people get lost in the numbers. So I think if it could be made more concise, just saying, the primary things that you could do, and you need to do them now as the window is closing, is to reduce the amount of fossil fuel through driving gas-powered cars, and eating beef if you wanted to put that in, taking long-distance air flights, and using natural gas in your home. So I would make it more concise or just take it out entirely. Thank you.
Going to move on to the next public comment. You may begin when you're ready.
Hi, this is Lucinda Young. I also think this is an excellent declaration, and I thank all of you, especially the subcommittee, for your work on this. It has been, I don't know, some time that I think we initially, or residents initially started asking for an emergency climate declaration early last year. It's been talked about for a long time. We spent a lot of time on it at the December meeting. We're now in February. I think it's really important that we get something passed. And I think the language is really terrific. I do have some problems, as Nick expressed, with the last paragraph. I think it's really great information, but I question whether it's really appropriate to include this in a declaration as opposed to someplace else. For example, the city website, under the sustainability tab, has information about carbon-free Albany, and I think that would be a great place to actually include a list of actions that citizens could take. But I just question whether this is the appropriate place to start listing actions that individuals can take. I think there are just so many actions that can be taken. I do think, as I think it was Katie had mentioned, that it invites debate. What we want to do is get this thing through City Council. It's already been a long time that it's kind of been in the works. I think especially when you have like the numbers and so on, it just means somebody, staff or City Council, has to verify that, and you can get into some disagreement. I had spoken with a City Council member some time ago about the emergency declaration. They said, yeah, what would be supported? I just, emphasize, I don't think it's something that City Council or staff should spend a whole lot of time on, because it is symbolic and symbols are important. But I feel like this additional language is just possibly creating a hurdle to getting this thing pushed through. So, the important thing is that we get something passed, I think, tonight, and not kick it to next month or next month. My preference would just be to leave that out, but if, the committee wants to include that, the most important thing is that we get this declaration passed. Yeah, I think that's, those are all my comments. Thank you. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to our next public comment. You may begin when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Catherine, also with the Albany Climate Action Coalition. I want to thank you to start as well for this excellent work and for all the discussions and debate that's gone into creating this. I know it takes a lot to get alignment. I just want to agree with what Nick and Lucinda were saying, that the urgency here is to get this passed now, not wait another month. So I would support whatever version of this declaration will get this done tonight. I'm feeling some urgency around not just climate action, making sure this gets passed, because none is better than perfect in terms of getting this out, whether you want to add less paragraph or not. I feel less about that than that we get something out, because we need to declare this emergency now so we can start unlocking funding to prioritize, expand, and improve the city's efforts to address the urgency of the problem. So I want to comment on a couple other related things, so that once we get this declaration passed, then ideally I'd like to see creating a dedicated climate action manager for the city, reporting to the city manager to oversee coordination of all the city efforts, integrate the CAAP recommendations, and have tasks specific to increasing funding for those efforts. Secondly, to provide funding and budget planning support climate action efforts as needed for multi-year strategies that need immediate work to be successful. And then thirdly, to measure success, and that we need to have an intermediate milestone starting now for each year to lead to the success of the goals established by the climate action plans. So thanks for letting me work on this, and hope we're getting this done tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We'll move on to our last public comment.
Hi, I want to thank you for all your work on this, and I agree with the foregoing speakers. I have a more strong opinion that I think that the last paragraph should be left out. I think it's, the numbers, they don't really provide context. 1,200 or 1,900 pounds, is that a little? Is that a lot? I don't know. You got to tell me what the big picture is to know if that's making a difference or not. And I think if it goes to city council, they're gonna have the same questions. They're gonna ask for clarifications, and it's gonna, this is just gonna drag on. So I'd rather just have that paragraph just removed, make it clean. Make this statement, this vision, declaration, and then all the, we can get into the weeds on the website and provide the top 10 ways you can. Fight climate change and provide more information and put it in context and do all those sorts of things elsewhere. I think to guarantee this sails through and gets approved, I strongly advise we just drop the last paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is all for public comment.
All right, we can move on to discussion for this item.
So what do you think? Seems like it's pretty overwhelming sentiment to trim this down at least. The first time I read it, I'm sorry, I'm not on. There we go. The first time I read it, I was, I'm more familiar with this than the average person, so maybe it didn't strike me as hard, but it is a lot of information, and you kind of wonder, what's it getting at? So I appreciate the comments from the public. I kind of had the same idea that, make it concise and to the point, and like you said, like Katie said, the first and last sentences probably say the most. And if we want to put some examples, I could see saying something like, residents, are encouraged to take action. For example, blah blah blah. And 3 things maybe, without all the impact numbers. I would support that. Just a revision on the fly here.
Let me begin. First off, I just want to commend Troy because he was the one who put the pen to paper to create the first draft of this, and I think it's worth mentioning that was a real nice effort. As far as the numbers and so on, one of the drafts said people should, it didn't have numbers, it said people should really try hard to go to electric vehicles if they can, install heat pumps, and avoid flying. And the criticism of that was that it was not encompassing enough. It left out too many people. We've heard a comment here that the numbers don't provide context, and that's an easy thing to fix. From Michelle's work, we could come up with a pounds per person per year in Albany and add that. I'm not sure we want to do that, but certainly we could provide that context. Another commenter mentioned that there are loads and loads and loads of ways to reduce carbon, so why just these few? And the answer is that these are the big ones. Another commenter said you can find this sort of information on various websites. And I challenge any one of you to find that information on a website within 15 minutes. I mean, I knew what I was looking for, and I finally found some really broad ranges for some kind of not terribly well-defined alternatives. I think it was pages 49 and 50 of one of the city websites that deals with this. So this is simple information, and it's actionable. We're asking people, we're telling people we want City of Albany. We want the residents to take urgent action. And we're not going to tell them what urgent actions we're really recommending? That strikes me as peculiar. Now, if we want to take out the numbers and just say the 3 biggest items, if you're fortunate enough to do them, are get an EV, install a heat pump space heater, and try to not fly so often. I'm happy with that. But I do think that if we're asking people for urgent action, it would be a good idea to give them an idea of what actions really make a difference. Thank you.
I mean, I guess my thought on that is, I totally appreciate that, you know, that information is powerful and it helps inform people, but this document is not an informational document, it's a symbolic statement, as one of the speakers said, and it's a communication tool, and communication needs to be, you know, to the point of what it's trying to communicate. And you know, I'm not an expert in that, but we just heard 4 people from the public say it's not achieving that. So maybe, you know, while I appreciate all the effort went into it, and you're absolutely right, it's hard to find this information, might not be the right place for this. So again, I would want to see it trimmed down to examples only at the most. You know,
Yeah, I would say between the, I guess earlier delineated 3 options, what Eric said, which is using the examples, but no numbers, or including the full paragraph or excluding. I personally, of those options, would prefer excluding the whole paragraph, even though it has pretty valuable information in it, only for the pragmatic sake of moving along to our many other things that we wanted to work on this evening. That's my preference, but I won't stand in the way if we have.
The whole paragraph meaning the whole.
Take that whole last one out, would be my preference, but I definitely won't stand in the way of any other group proposal that gets this passed this evening.
Yeah, I think kind of where I'm coming at this, I think that would also be my preference, just removing the whole paragraph, but definitely open to, you know, find a middle path here that gets us all on board. I guess, yeah, kind of for some of the things you were talking about, Mark, is there kind of like, I guess, a version of this tonight with some of the numbers reduced that still, you feel it still delivers the message you're looking at for? If, say, we take out, for instance, at the part after heat pump space heater, reducing emissions by roughly 2,000 pounds a year. Or say or just to reduce that one to residents who default transportation as conventional automobile can avoid emissions by walking, cycling, riding, or using electric vehicle.
Well, I don't think I'm going to answer that directly. There's kind of a philosophical difference here, maybe. Some people come at this from the notion that we need to encourage everyone. You know, that the things that we can do individually, at least for some of us, are so tiny. Nick Peterson, I think, was the one who mentioned that sort of thing. So if we're coming at this from the point of we want to instill enthusiasm in a mass movement, that's one approach. And I'm realizing, looking at this, my approach is kind of different. I want to provide specific guidance to the people in Albany who are part of the problem by definition and have the means to be a big part of the solution. So is your focus kind of the let's get everybody together and act and so on, urgent action, get them revved up, but don't actually tell them what to do, or provide numbers for a few fortunate people so that we can get pretty significant reduction? So I'm certainly on the latter side, but I can understand why some people would be on the other side, that, you know, what's important is the groundswell of public sentiment, if you will.
Thank you for explaining it in that way. Like, I think that does kind of get to the heart of it. For me personally, I'm in the rah-rah, this is for people who get fired up camp, but not to the exclusion of the necessity of doing what you're trying to accomplish here, which is, after all, I think what we on the Home Electrification Subcommittee are very much trying to accomplish, to drive rapid adoption of personal emissions changes in those who can afford to make those changes and those who are, as you say, essentially the biggest polluters. Like, I really want to get that done. I just don't want to get that done with this tool, is all, personally.
Yeah, I really took this as, you know, the kind of communication that is, you know, for the Albany residents, you know, the average person that knows about climate change, they know about, you know, it seems like it's a big deal. I hear about it once in a while. And then the city comes out and says, there's an emergency. Then that's like a statement that moves the dial a little bit for those kind of people. And it's like, oh, wow, even our city council is saying, wow, this is like really serious. Okay, you know, maybe I'll take a look at that carbon-free Albany website now. Which is where they would get this and more.
I'll just mention the first sentence in the climate action plan that was just adopted in 2019 is, we have a climate emergency. Yeah. So this is reiterating that.
And the city doesn't have a statement that's official like this yet. So I totally agree with the sentiment of the public comments that this is absolutely needed. I mean, Albany needs to get, you know, on with all the other cities that have declared climate emergency, because right now we're in those cities that have not. So officially, I mean, so. Sorry, I wanted to ask one. So if you were to remove that whole paragraph, where would that leave this document? It would be a further resolve. Albany will continue to foster community collaboration in climate initiatives priorities for all residents. So that would be the end right there. Yeah, I mean, how can we move forward? I mean,
I guess we would motion on like a specific action on this document if we want to do anything with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion now, but if folks want to keep talking, that's all right too. But I guess I would move that we adopt this document without the final paragraph.
Any second?
Just to clarify quickly, technically, because the committee can't adopt anything, you'd be recommending to the council to adopt
Sorry, yeah.
this declaration.
Yeah. Should I re-say that?
I think that's fine if someone wants to second it with the slight adjustment there.
Yes.
I was kind of looking to the subcommittee to see if you were going to second, but I would second that. I mean, that seems like a good statement.
Okay, any comments before I Take a roll call.
Yeah, I'll just have one more question mark. I guess, yeah, is there a version of that last paragraph that is more concise and something we could agree upon here tonight that would, I guess, put you in a yes camp for adopting or recommending to adopt?
Well, there's a lot of good stuff in here, so I would not vote against this, even with the last paragraph deleted. And there's trying to parse, specific, but most aimed at the most fortunate people among us and so on. We've been over this territory quite a bit. So I heard a motion and a second, and maybe it's just time to get on with the night.
Okay,
Thank you, though.
great. Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Motion adopted. Thank you, everyone.
And then now we can move on to the next item.
Yes. The next item is a proposal from our Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee.
Right. So last month, I presented ideas about the Albany city fleet conversion to EV and installation of charging stations for both the city fleet and for public charging stations on city-owned property. And I got feedback from the committee, so that was great. And since then, I've talked with Michelle and got input from her on, sort of how the process might work and sort of the best way to put these into proposals or recommendations. So I have 3 recommendations for action to move on to approval by City Council. So if you want to go ahead. So again, this is started way back in the CAP that the Albany City would implement fleet procurement policies and encourage switch to electric vehicles. So this is action to carry that out. I think we covered this before, so that's good. All right, so the summary of recommendations is to have Albany City Council make a statement about electrifying the city vehicles, and then providing plans for installation of charging stations and installation of public charging stations at Albany City properties. Right. So the background on the fleet vehicle electrification, stumbling. So I think that we should put in terms of a goal of turnover of the city vehicles as they are coming up for replacement, and that we would have a goal of 10 years. So I put the fiscal year end 2034 as the goal for transitioning the entire Albany City vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. Acknowledging that this would, that Albany already has a purchase process in place for looking at sustainability impact, but this would go further than that. There's also a thing called CARB, and I forgot what that acronym stands for, but
The California Air Resources Board.
there we go, thank you. That requires replacement of some types of vehicles with EVs, and so this again would go further than that. But the city is already acting on these kind of things already. But this recommendation would go further than that. So it required. So the Albany City Council would require that all cities departments prioritize electric vehicles, and I said it that way so that we would have Albany City Council directing the departments to prioritize electric vehicles when replacing a city vehicle. Right now, each department has to justify why they're getting the type of vehicle, but this would be like I think a further statement to the prioritize and the turnover. Again, and I said non-emergency because I don't want to get wrapped up into well, we can't do emergency vehicles, and that's going to bog it all down. So I think that it makes sense to say we'll take police and other emergency vehicles as EV options are available. And I know that that's maybe a little bit of a compromise, but I think the goal is to get the electric vehicle fleet turned over in a reasonable period of time. So the recommendation, oh, I forgot that I had a slide in here about this. So this is what the CARB is. That 50% of vehicles must be EV, and it has to do more with public works kind of trucks and those kind of vehicles. Exempt vehicles are emergency, small vehicles, and low vehicle miles traveled. So anyway, but that's just a little bit, that's just a information about what CARB is. Okay, I think the next one is the actual recommendation. So, so this would be the actual recommendation for number one. Climate Action Committee recommends that the Albany City Council require all city departments to prioritize electric vehicles when replacing any seated vehicle, with the goal of replacing all non-emergency vehicles with EVs by fiscal 2034, and to transition police pursuit and other emergency vehicles as viable EV options are available. So that's the actual language of the recommendation to City Council. So second is to, of course, if we're going to electrify the city fleet, we need charging stations available for them. So, so in talking with Michelle, we worked out that she said that the sort of the process would be that staff would recommend, or staff would get, would do a capital improvement project to analyze and get funding for this kind of project. And so that's what the recommendation here is going to be, that Albany City Council would recommend to the staff to create a capital improvement project. So that's the language here, is that we recommend the council direct staff to develop plans for a capital improvement project for the next capital improvement project cycle for installation of charging stations to serve the city vehicle fleet transition. And number three, we talked a little bit about, getting started on installing charging stations for public use on city property. And that was part of the purview of my actions on the subcommittee. So again, this would have City Council approve the investigation of that with a capital improvement project. And so I kept it pretty open on this. And this is just background information here. Go ahead and go to the next one. So the actual recommendation would be that City Council direct staff to develop plans for a capital improvement project for the next cycle for installation of public charging stations. So that gives staff the, once the recommendation, once City Council has that direction to staff, then it is open for looking at like how many charging stations are, needed, practical, what's the budget, all that kind of stuff. So rather than do all that research up front, figured that we'll get the ball rolling here with a capital improvement project cycle. So those are the three recommendations that I'm proposing that we move on to City Council for action.
Any questions?
Yeah, kind of deep in the weeds, but if Albany had a charging station on city property for public charging, what would Albany charge per kilowatt hour? Would it just be a pass through the PG&E rate, or would Albany be trying to put a markup on that to cover something? And
was that for city fleet charging or for public charging?
public.
In that case, it could go any number of ways. It could be free, it could be at market rate, or it could be more to cover some costs. That would all theoretically be part of the CIP project development.
So the staff would be making, or, well, outlining the options, maybe not making a recommendation. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll talk more about I'll get back to this a little bit later on in the meeting tonight. Thank you.
And I guess just to add on, it's my intent is that, you know, we want to encourage the transition of the Albany City residents to electric vehicles. And we know that, that fear of range and lack of infrastructure for charging are two of the things that people bring up all the time about hesitation for electric vehicles. And so part of my thought process on this is to have the city make it visible that there's charging stations in Albany, you know, just visible. And, you know, if you're an electric vehicle owner, you know it's not really practical to, you know, leave your car at the you know, the rec center or something for a long period of time. But they're visible, so if you feel like you can have access to that, it helps you with the adoption. So I wasn't really thinking too much about the revenue. And even something like, you know, leasing to ChargePoint or something like that would be fine with me. You know, it's just getting the charging stations installed and active.
And I'm wondering about the types of chargers. And again, this is maybe deeper in the weeds than this needs to be. But for public charging, I would think that people would want a rapid charger, you know, a level 2 or a DC or something like that, so they can plug in for 15 minutes, get a lot of power, and be on their way. Whereas for the city, I would think that we would, city vehicles, excuse me, I would think that we would want to minimize the cost by having a level 1 charger and let the vehicles be plugged in overnight. So there might be a bit of a tension there between city charging on city property and public charging on city property, because the ideal chargers would be different. Just a comment.
Here you mentioned the capital improvement project cycle. How long is that?
They're usually 2-year cycles.
Oh, that's what Jeff Baum was explaining a few.
Yeah, pretty much everything's in 2-year cycles around here. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure where in the cycle we are, but.
Okay. And then there was the metric there in goal 1 about having the goal to turn over the fleet within 10 years. And I'm wondering, does the city retire vehicles after a certain length of time or by some other metric?
It varies. It's pretty similar to how anybody retires a vehicle, you know, when it no longer is serving its purpose because it's too old or it's broken down or whatever other reason. Generally, the emergency vehicles are retired at a faster rate because they're used much more frequently. But yeah, it kind of varies from vehicle to vehicle, and it's done by judging the performance of the vehicle itself.
Thank you.
And just to, you know, it always comes up, but, you know, Albany's a small city, and so the vehicles are pretty low vehicle miles traveled on vehicles, so they actually last a long time. But I always try to point out on the flip side of that is it makes it very practical for electric vehicles to operate in the city because you don't have to go very far. So the range is really not an issue.
I had one question that I think would best answered by Michelle. I remember last June, staff presented on some of the barriers y'all were seeing to charging on public right-of-ways and city-owned facilities. I was curious what the, I guess maybe like breadth of that analysis was, or I guess, kind of just to like see what, you know, if a city funded, or if we did another funding for another study, how that might be different than what you guys already did last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So we did a fleet electrification study that was funded by EBCE, now AVA, Community Energy, which took place a couple of years ago. And that study covered basically an analysis of the vehicles we have, their expected turnover rate, and what kinds of chargers would would be needed if they were to be converted to EVs, and also the expected capital and maintenance costs of the cars and chargers. So it covered a lot of good base level ground, but it didn't go into any detail about like where we would install a charger on city property, how much would that cost? Do we have enough electrical capacity? Any of those kinds of, really in the weeds details. And so the CIP projects would be covering that. It would be an analysis of, where could we actually place chargers? What types of chargers would we put where? What kind of electrical upgrades might we need? Do we need to, do wiring underground through the parking lot? All those kinds of things. So it'd be building off of the previous research. There hasn't been as much work into the potential for public charging on city property. So that would be a little bit of a separate analysis, but it's also a bit less complicated because we're not talking about a specific fleet. It's just public charging in general. So does that answer all your question?
If I can just add on, the third one is, it's kind of like the low priority in this set of three. But I wanted to put it in there because if you just did a return on investment kind of analysis, is it worth, are we going to make, is it make financial sense to put charging stations on Albany city property? The answer is probably going to be no. It's probably going to cost more than, than we would make on, revenue or something like that. But I kind of feel like that's what the city's purview is to take that step when it doesn't make great return on investment, but it's something that we want for the benefit of the city. That's when the city can step in and say, yep, we're going to do this. We're going to take city funds and we're going to do this. So that's what I'm asking for city council to take a step forward on.
I think this is maybe a question for Michelle. I have heard I think at various public comments, mention of past approved funds for, I think they were for, either for public chargers on city property, or maybe they were for city chargers. And I guess I think I would appreciate a little of the backstory on what that was about.
Yeah, this was before my time, so I won't have all the details. I always wish Lizzie was here to answer these questions because she remembers better than I do. But there was a grant that was awarded to the city for the installation of chargers. I'm not sure if they were meant to be public or for city vehicles. It covered a portion of the cost, but not all of the cost to install the chargers. And at the time, the Public Works Department didn't have the bandwidth, nor was there city funding available to cover the rest of the cost. And so the chargers weren't installed by the time the grant period had lapsed. That's my best understanding of it. Yeah.
It's great. Thank you. It's a good summary.
Any other questions?
If not, we can move on to public comment.
We have one public comment. You may begin when you're ready.
Thanks, Nick Peterson. It's interesting when I get this, I get a huge screen with my name on it and I have no clock. So I'm not sure why that is. But anyway, I don't know how the time is going. First of all, I commend Eric. I worked with Eric when I was on the committee, and this has been an ongoing, long process of trying to see how we can incentivize zero emission transportation and have the city be a leader in that aspect. So part of this is, has a little bit of symbolism, isn't really a cost benefit analysis. It's just showing the city's leading the way in this. If you're going to ask everybody to not drive their gas car and the city is driving gas vehicles around, it doesn't really make sense. A couple things I'd like to see. First, I think there were some lessons learned in that last project that didn't happen. And no, there actually was. Lucinda Young chased this down. There were city funds, and I think it was just decided. So I think that would be a really good part to add at least a pilot project for one vehicle.
Live in multifamily rental housing.
goal, I'm like slightly uncomfortable with that, because what if the cars detail about what happened with the last round of trying to get this done, and that
So I tried to use language in here that would give us some wiggle room. Goal of 10 years is not a requirement. It's a goal. So, I wouldn't want to see us not put something in there that's a little, fairly specific about a time frame, so that, that there is some expectation. But yeah, I don't want to constrain the city to, having to start throwing away vehicles and actually contributing to more landfill waste than we want to, or something like that. So, yeah, I agree with that. And on the third one, doing a capital improvement project doesn't commit us to anything. It allows staff to go and investigate what is, feasible, what can be budgeted, and then get actual funds, allocated to it. Just working with Michelle, it feels like this is the way to get some action moving forward on it. But it's not asking for actual funds from us, from the city council.
is it correct to say that if it didn't go through as an item for a capital improvement project, that staff time couldn't be allocated to something like a lessons learned about public chargers on city property?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, that topic comes up frequently, and I'm just ready to say, let's get a new project going and let's move forward. To me, this is the way to get action again. That grant in the past, who knows? I'm not really. So I just want to try to get some action going on this, and I don't think anything would happen with this idea unless we push it to city council and city council pushes it back to staff. There's a lot of things that staff is, being asked to do, and I totally appreciate, the work that they do. And, I feel this is important, so this is our conduit to getting them to look at it. So
it's more like it's like a prioritization thing.
Yeah, I think this, speaking with Jeff, the community development director, and Justin as well, it sounded like this language and this approach was really the most fluid way to get this done, and really to say for the committee to, give a prioritization to council of what staff should be doing with their time, and what kind of projects to be working on. And then, the decision to develop a CIP project, which, does require a lot of staff analysis, is really a council decision. So that's sort of the most effective way to move this project ahead. I think a lessons learned report on that previous project would kind of be in a different realm than something like a CIP project planning. And yeah, I don't know how many people are still here who were involved in that, so I don't really know what that would look like. Yeah.
Yeah, first want to commend Eric for putting together a great set of recommendations here. I would personally be comfortable with moving ahead on recommending all three of these tonight. I think they have strong language and good recommendations on how to move forward with some good options. I also think there are, I think this issue of these past charters has been discussed a number of times, and I think there are lessons we can pull just from the comments we've had in these meetings in a way that are available now and can be built into this next CIP or whatever vision comes from this, in a way that makes sure those, whatever happened, those barriers can be redone or, overcome this time, as well as I think plenty of other reports on barriers to installing infrastructure from other cities' experiences that can be leveraged outside of what specifically happened in Albany. I guess maybe the one thing I wanted to just make sure to clarify I got this right. 'Cause I see like in number 3 of public charging, I see it says develop plans for installation of public charging. But then in the bullets, it talks more about investigating the best sites. So I guess I just wanted to confirm if by plans for installation, it could also mean just these kind of like wraparound studies.
That was the intent, yeah.
Okay.
That would give staff the flexibility and the opportunity to, look for siting, infrastructure that, like Michelle mentioned, where the best electrical, access is, where the best, public areas would be, parking. There's so many things to consider. I wanted to keep, leave it as an open project for the staff to take it from there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think I agree there. As I study a lot of this in my day job, and I own an EV and do charging, and I just know how hard it is to reliably maintain a DC fast charging system. So I have some pretty serious concerns about the city going into something and maintaining that type of charging experience in a way that promotes EVs instead of having users have kind of disappointing EV charging experiences. So yeah, I would definitely like to see the flexibility for either city-owned but third-party contracted in a way that stays very high maintenance or high availability, or it's just some type of lease or cheap lease or something, incentives put in to attract third parties to operate.
I might add in a comment here just for context and so no one's blindsided. For this final recommendation, number 3, the general consensus among staff is that this is a lower priority than the other ones, and that our other attempts in public charging have been more difficult than we think maybe the value proposition is. So there's a good chance that, assuming the committee does approve this and send it to council, that staff would either not have a recommendation or recommend not to approve this third CIP or this CIP project for public charging. That's not to say that the committee can't recommend it, of course, but just from a staff perspective, we would recommend to focus on some of the other projects we're doing, such as like the multifamily EV pilot and some of these other things. And perhaps we're a little bit more protective of our staff time, a little more conservative in that sense. So just to kind of let you be aware of that in your calculations. But of course, the committee is absolutely free to recommend whatever it likes.
And just to reflect on the public comment about the police vehicle pilot, I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that's something that could be the next thing that I work on or the subcommittee works on. I wouldn't want to try to include that on this one right now. I think that's just too hot a potato to try to take into this. I'd like to get this going, and then take that. I think that's an interesting idea. Call it a pilot program for the police vehicles, but take on that on as the next thing that we on the list.
I guess, from what I understand of the summary of the past work, the grant-funded work, some of what would be done under Goal 3 here is a bit redundant of that, right? It'd be like re-looking at where's a good spot for a charger and what are the logistics and the cost estimates and so forth. So it would sort of be reinventing that wheel, and I'm a little uncomfortable with that without better knowing what the wheel was in the first place, and if there was anything not serviceable about it, or if it was just a bad time for that idea, maybe it could be picked up and funding could be sought to do the same thing that's already been analyzed, rather than reanalyzing it 2 years from now. So I still feel a little uncomfortable with that one, but great about the other two.
In terms of recommending this action, not knowing what happened before, or if it was not done because of some reasons? I mean,
Well, my understanding, I guess, is that, there was this, that this would, essentially fund staff time to do this analysis, which has perhaps already been done. So I would want to know what was the state of that project when it was abandoned before recommending, or, recommending to the council that they approve more staff time to redo that analysis.
What I can say about that is that in my time here, we have done analysis, kind of small level analyses of potential public charging options. We've looked at a few different ways that public charging could be done and never got very far with any of them. And then, of course, yeah, there's the previous project that I wasn't involved with, which I'm sure there's some learnings to it. So, if council directed us to develop this CIP project, we would probably start at those places and say, okay, what did we look at? What did we throw out for whatever reason? But that said, it is something that maybe could be helpful to, try to summarize a little bit, or, see if there's some basic information we can pull up before the committee making a recommendation or not. This is part of what I was saying, is that based on the small amount of analysis we've done, it feels like it would be really difficult. So that's part of the reason we keep dropping it. So that might lead the committee to say, oh, well, we don't want to pursue that. But like I said, if we were directed to work on the CIP, we would start with kind of looking back at what we've already analyzed. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. It does.
any other discussion?
Just a comment. A thought from the previous discussion on the climate emergency declaration kind of applies here too. If our goal is a groundswell of visible change, then the priority order here is appropriate, goals 1, 2, 3. If our goal is to get the biggest CO2 emission reductions as soon as possible, then we should make goal 3 be goal 1. Have rapid chargers available to the public, and of course, if they're available to the public, an Albany City vehicle could drive up and use them too. Now, that's a pretty big change, and I'm not suggesting it, I'm just mentioning that this is another place where Albany City vehicles, as you mentioned, have low VMT, so on the other hand, we wouldn't be spending all that much money because I suspect it would be mostly level 1 chargers, vehicles are plugged in overnight, but there's a bit of a tension between the groundswell of public opinion and big emission reductions in a hurry. That's my comment.
And the sort of the assumption that's baked into that is if you build it, they'll come. That you will get big emission reductions because for sure the presence of the chargers would drive adoption. Okay. I don't know if that's true, but if that's true, then I agree.
Yeah. And I was looking at this as what can the city do to make a statement to the Albany residents? And the first thing is to electrify their own fleet. And so that's why I still think that that's the priority. I agree with you. Access to charging stations for the residents of Albany would make the biggest impact, but, I think that the city should make a statement and electrify their own vehicles if they're going to ask the residents to do that too, so. But, get your point.
In the analyses that you're aware of or participated in, to what extent was their analysis done on inviting third-party companies to be the ones to install and maintain those chargers?
I don't know that we got that far into the logistics. We were more focused on locations and infrastructure. I think it's kind of always been in there as a potential route, but I wouldn't say we've looked into it super deeply.
If we wanted to look into it, would that also be something that would have to go through the CIP workflow, do you think?
I think that would be the best place for that analysis, yeah.
Thank you.
So should I make the motion to adopt, to have Climate Action Committee recommend to City Council the 3 recommendations that were presented?
I guess I'll second.
Great. Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Am I going to tank this if I say no? It just passes with a majority?
Yes.
Okay, no.
Okay. Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, now we can move on to the next item, which is,
I am the next item. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So I'll be giving a presentation now on our gas line decommissioning pilot program. This is a program that I mentioned a couple months ago when we received a Department of Energy grant. It's very exciting. And tonight we're going to be really taking our first step into some of the work of this project regarding the prioritization of our outreach. So as always, I'll start with a little bit of background here. So the project itself, the central goal is to decommission a section of natural gas pipeline. So basically to turn the pipe off. And the pipeline will be about the length of 1 city block. And in order to do that, we have to electrify all of the connected buildings. So that's the main goal at the center of the project. There's a lot to be said about gas line decommissioning as an approach to electrification and decarbonization. But the main 2 things I'll say are that it is really meant to be more efficient and more equitable than the sort of haphazard one-by-one electrification that we do. Not to say that that type is bad either, but this is sort of an additional approach. So as you can see in the picture on the left here, if you're doing untargeted electrification where maybe you have, 1 electric appliance in a house or maybe 1 house on a block that's fully electric, that's fantastic, but all of the necessary infrastructure for the gas still has to remain in place. Whereas if you're doing targeted electrification and you're electrifying an entire house or an entire block, then you can actually get rid of that natural gas infrastructure. It affords opportunities for cost savings in the electrification work itself, as well as reducing the need for investments in a gas pipeline that is receiving less and less utilization, and eventually we will become unused. And those are really big investments, as you probably know, because it's a huge amount of infrastructure. So it's very efficient. And then in terms of equity, what it really boils down to is those investments in gas, which are incredibly costly. The gas system in California is very expensive to maintain. It's getting more expensive to maintain every year. And the use of that gas system is going down every year because we're electrifying very effectively. And so what happens is that you're getting less and less revenue for a company like PG&E, and that revenue is being spread, or sorry, the costs are being spread among a smaller number of paying customers, and so the prices go up. And that's happening at a rate that we think is fast now, but if everything stays the same, it's gonna look like nothing in comparison in about 20 years. The estimates for the costs of gas in 2050 are that it will be at least 5 times higher than it is now. And the people that are going to be paying for that insanely expensive gas are mostly the people that can't afford to electrify or don't have an option to electrify because they rent. And so that becomes a huge equity issue when we're really looking into the future. And one of the ways to prevent that is by strategically decommissioning these gas lines and preventing all of that expense. And then also, in that process, electrifying the homes of the people that don't currently have access to electrification. So that's really what's at the heart of this pilot. For a little bit more logistical background, we have been working with PG&E for a few years now on identifying potential sites where we could actually do this work. And we've narrowed it down to 12 sites within the city where the gas line can be shut off without messing with the rest of the system, and where the gas line is expected to need repair or replacement in the relatively near future. Not anything that's planned, like in the next couple of years, but soon-ish. Also, as I said, the Department of Energy awarded us a $200,000 grant for the next phase of the project. That includes community outreach, building analyses, and deployment planning. One other piece of information that's very important is that in order to decommission a gas line, all of the building owners on that line have to agree to electrify their buildings. Even one person saying no makes it so that we're not allowed to decommission the gas line, and that's based on California law. So, important thing to keep in mind. So, talking through the next steps of the project here, as I mentioned, we're starting with community outreach. In the next couple of months, hopefully fairly soon, we'll be hiring consultants using that grant money to help us with outreach and creating an outreach plan. And this is going to be really intensive and targeted outreach to specific blocks that we've selected as potential sites. That will lead into energy assessments of the buildings. This will be a different set of consultants that will be helping who have some more of the technical expertise to analyze each building and determine exactly what work needs to be done to electrify that building, what the cost is likely to be, all those kinds of details. And then we'll move into the deployment planning stage, which is where it gets really tricky, and we have to get to that 100% agreement with all of the building owners on at least one block in order to move forward with the project. That process is going to be negotiation and education and lots of discussions about what the funding strategy and scope and cost share and project management aspects all look like. None of that stuff has been determined yet because we are missing a lot of information. But that's part of this phase of the process. And then finally, a reporting phase as well. A big part of this project is about learning things and sharing that knowledge with other jurisdictions as well as the state and the Department of Energy. And we'll be developing toolkits and policy guides and reports for everyone. And then phase 3 is construction. And so that's something that would be happening after this 2-year grant period we're in. It would be a separate funding source and a whole separate plan. And that would be where we are actually electrifying the buildings on that selected block and working with PG&E to decommission the gas line. So that's the timeline that we're looking at. Like I said, this is a 2-year grant period, which will probably be starting in April, by the looks of it. And that leads us to our work tonight, which is a tricky and interesting discussion about how to go about this outreach process. And so what we really need to do before we start is to determine how many and which blocks we're going to begin this outreach with. It could be 1 or 3 or 5 or 12. And there's a lot of different ways that we could prioritize between the blocks for how we start that outreach. So the role of the CAC tonight is to provide input to the council on what you think those priorities should be. The actual decision-making of like which specific blocks it will be is something that is going to be decided by council in collaboration with staff and consultants. We're going to kind of go through this process partly with budget and timing and all kinds of factors to determine like, okay, is it going to be 3 blocks or 5 or how are we going to do this? So what I think is really going to be valuable for the CAC to provide is not just like a list of A, B, and C blocks, but a sense of where you think the priorities should lie so that we can take that information as we get more feedback and get closer to determining exactly what our plan is. Hopefully that makes sense. So that said, there's a lot of different ways to strategize and prioritize. For instance, you could say that we want there to be a variety of blocks in the first few that we choose to do outreach with. Or maybe we want them all to be fairly similar. Maybe we want to try to balance out different factors or really, really just focus on one. Maybe that focus should be on equity or deliverability or a specific type of building or greenhouse gas emissions or something I haven't even thought of, right? So there's lots of ways you can go with this. There's no correct answer, and your prioritization recommendation to council could look many, many ways. So it's a little open-ended, which I know is always tough. But I have tried to arrange this in a way to be a little bit more digestible for you. So first of all, I wanted to group our blocks by building type. So hopefully you all had a chance to look at the spreadsheet of blocks. They're still under NDA, so they've been named by letters and have been, made slightly less specific. But these are the blocks that I've kind of grouped by letter based on the kinds of buildings that they have. So we have A through E, which are single-family blocks. They're all single-family buildings. They have between 10 and 30 units. And there's a slight difference in the renter population between them. So A has the most renters at 70%, B and C have around 30%, and D and E have 10-15%. Then we have blocks F through I. These are a mix of single and multifamily and are mostly renters, largely because there's a lot of multifamily units in them. F and G are on the smaller side, only 20 to 30 units, and H and I have a lot of units, 60 to 75. So that's the main difference between them. And then also F and I each have a commercial building on the block. And then finally there's blocks J through L. These are single and multifamily blocks again, but they include condos, which are a little bit more complicated because they have more building owners, even though it's multifamily buildings. So J and K have around 35, 40 units each and are about half renters, half owner occupied. And then L has only 10 units, so it's a much smaller block and they're mostly owner occupied. So that's one way of kind of arranging the blocks. And then another big way of thinking about this is considering equity versus deliverability, which are not exactly opposites, but are often in tension. So deliverability really just means like how likely are we to be able to actually get that 100% buy-in and then also be able to find the funding to completely electrify a block. We know that this is a really difficult project. There's a fairly good chance that we will not succeed in being able to get this 100%. So looking at something that's more deliverable could be a good priority. Generally, the blocks that have fewer building owners to convince and fewer and newer units that are cheaper to electrify are easier to complete. On the other side, we have the potential equity impact. Like I said, equity really is at the heart of this project. And so might be good to prioritize equity at the root of this. One way to do that is to look at blocks that have a lot of multifamily buildings or a lot of renter-occupied units. There are, of course, lots of other factors, such as low-income households, even households that maybe have high incomes but very little liquid wealth to be able to electrify themselves. You might look at racial disparity or, non-English speaking households, all kinds of things. Unfortunately, we can't really measure any of those factors right now because we don't have enough information about the blocks. So that's not something we've included, although it is something we're thinking about. So these two, like I said, are often kind of in tension with each other. If you have a lot of multifamily buildings, you're probably gonna have a lot of units, right? So again, I've kind of separated the blocks in a way that thinks about these two factors in hopes that that might be sort of helpful in digesting. On the left side here, we have blocks that are more on that equity focus. We're looking at H, I, J, and K. All of them have multifamily buildings. H and I, and the little smaller circle, also have a high renter population. Right? On the right side, we have blocks that are more in the deliverability camp, who have not that many units and owners. So we have B, D, E, L, and C. And then again, in the smaller circle, E, L, and C also have mostly newer buildings, so we'd expect them to be a little bit less expensive to electrify. And then in the middle, we have blocks that are sort of between these two camps, and in some ways have sort of a little bit more upside on both of them, you could argue. So all of these have a relatively high renter population, A, G, and F. A has all single-family buildings. It's just a lot of single-family buildings with renters. And then G and F have multifamily buildings, but they're a little bit on the smaller side, They're not like, I think it was H and I that just have a mass number of units. These are the ones that have fewer units. It's a little bit more easy to handle. So again, that's one way of looking at this. Of course, you could say, well, actually we want a block that has a ton of units because we want to get as many GHG emissions reductions as possible. And even if it's not deliverable, that's okay. We're just going to shoot for the moon. Or you might say that it's really important that we have a commercial building in the mix because we want to test that out. There's any number of things you could prioritize in here, so it's not meant to lead you one way or another, but just kind of one way to look at it, as I said. So with that said, your goal tonight is to try to come up with a recommendation to council about how to prioritize between these. That can be as vague or specific as you like, but hopefully can kind of capture your sense of priority as a committee. Happy to answer questions.
With a multifamily building, say a big apartment building that has 50 tenants, is there one owner that has to answer yes? Is the building owner the one that has to answer yes, or is it each individual renter that has to answer yes?
It's the building owner that has to answer yes. Of course, we want to have buy-in from the tenants as well, but legally speaking, it's the building owner.
And when it gets to electrification, there was that the last block on the timeline. It said electrification. Is the grant money being used for actually buying appliances to electrify the building? What does that mean? Fully electrify?
Yeah, so the grant money from the Department of Energy is really just for the consultants that will be doing outreach and building analyses. The appliances and construction for electrification will be funded from a different source that is not yet determined. My guess is that it'll be some mix of building owner funds, city funds, and maybe some kind of grant funding. But that's, it's beyond what we're doing right now.
One quick scope question. So say even in the best case scenario, we got multiple blocks that were 100% in, is the plan still to just focus on one for the actual construction?
That's the plan. Theoretically, if we're just incredibly successful, everybody wants to fully electrify, and we manage to find enough funding to make that feasible, then sure, we could do multiple blocks. But we're just really trying to focus on one to, keep our sights on something we can do for now.
I didn't quite, so one.
That's the focus. But theoretically, if that option was available to us, we wouldn't just ignore the other ones because
Right, yeah.
we said we wouldn't do it.
Any other questions? If not, we can.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question. The middle one says negotiate with owners to reach 100% agreement. So it is a discussion. I mean, it's not just to send a leaflet and say, hey, you want to join in on this. It can be a discussion.
Oh, it's a very long discussion. Yeah, I mean, we're expecting this to be, community meetings and events and demonstrations and, site visits and discussions and,
Okay.
It's a whole long process. Yeah.
A question about timing. So is the thought that if this committee were to say like, we'd like to prioritize the middle group, would outreach then only go to the middle group?
So, assuming the committee decides the middle group, council agrees, that all makes sense, that's the decision, then we would start there. And depending on how that goes, we might then go on to another block, if that made sense. So, for instance, if we start there and we're just hearing a bunch of people saying, no, we're not interested, go away, I don't want to talk to you, it just seems like it's really not going anywhere, then we'd just move on to a new block and do some more outreach. So it's not like we're picking 3 and the rest of them go out the window. It's really just about deciding where we're going to start.
Okay. And is there a sense, when you think about the scope of work that you're asking for from the outreach consultants, do you have any sense of like, is it feasible to ask them to do all the blocks? Is it infeasible and that's why we're really trying to get the priority straight now before we engage them?
We don't really know. We haven't hired the consultants yet. We're still working on the RFQ. There's a possibility that we try to do all 12 at once. So that's definitely within the realm of things that could happen. I think even if that's the case, we'd probably want to have a sense of maybe where we want to put more resources or more focus. But I also think, just based on the budget for the project, it's probably going to make the most sense to pick a few to start with and then see where it goes.
The question I had thinking about the deliverability aspect, since you are working with PG&E, is there potential to get information on things like, amps or voltage service that's going to these buildings already, and like how much electricity they're currently using?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've been talking to them about that. We can't get like house-specific data from them, unfortunately. We are trying to get some data about areas where it might be more or less difficult to upgrade services. So we're in the process of seeing if there's any of that we can get access to. We're also trying to get access to sort of generalized data about like care and FERA customers to see if we can get any low-income tidbits of data, I guess. There's limits on what they can give us and how specific it can be. But, as far as like seeing how many amps of service a particular house has, that would really have to come from the building analyses. Which are step 2.
All right. If there are any other questions, if not, I think we can move on to public comment.
We will begin with public comment. You can start when you're ready.
Yeah, okay, if you could give me a 10-second warning, that'd be great, because I'm not seeing the counter. This is Nick Peterson again. Thank you very much. This is very exciting. I think it's great. And I wouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is a study. And so the city has the opportunity to look at several different situations and analyze them and see where the hurdles are. So I would encourage you to do a mix of different areas, and maybe not so much of a focus on single family residents, because I think those are a little bit more of a known quantity and more common, and at least in the more affluent areas of Albany, people are capable of doing electrification themselves. Big hurdle that I see as a problem for Albany is how to get the naturally occurring low-income housing or NOAA housing converted over to electrical, which would be the most encouraging to have happen, because the people there are paying for the utilities themselves, and there's less of an incentive of the building owner to make any changes. Going back to that chart that was shown earlier about how the cost of gas is going to skyrocket, I guess the building owners would be worried in that if the cost of gas to live in an apartment was 4 times the rent, they probably wouldn't be able to rent out the apartment. But why wait till that situation actually occurs? So I would try to find, I think there's, if we're going to incentivize multifamily property owners to do the right thing, I would really put the bug in their ear during these studies that if they play, they can gain. Because obviously when we did the multifamily EV charging pilot project, they got thousands of dollars for improvement on their property. And even though they had to pony up some, that was pretty lucrative for them. So I think there's an opportunity here for Albany to do an outreach really to the owners of the naturally occurring affordable housing and to get them on board if there's an overlap of that. And I think there must be in some of these areas. So I would prioritize that and then try to get, certainly something with commercial, something with single family, and something with multifamily, and also with large condominium, if that's an issue too, because that would be really interesting to get some research done on how to contact everyone and get them to buy in. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. We will move on to the next public comment. You may begin when you're ready.
Hi, this is Lucinda Young. Michelle, thanks for the great presentation. Yes, I talked to Albany residents quite a bit about electrification and about transitioning some of their gas appliances to heat pumps. Our home is almost fully electric, and I'm always touting the benefits. I find there's a lot of resistance still to electrification, and so I think it's going to be really tough to get that 100%. Given my experience, people like their gas, they like their gas stoves. They are, what I often hear is, the power goes out, that I can't use my appliances if I'm all electric. So I think I'm concerned it's going to be tough to get that 100%. And given that, I think we really need to focus on deliverable. As much as I would like to see, electrification occur in blocks with, multifamily units, I think it's going to be just really challenging, and I would hate to see this 200,000 be used up without some results. I'm really hoping we get that 200,000 is able to be accomplish the result that we get 100% on one block. And I think the best bet for that is to focus on deliverable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes public comment.
Thank you. We're getting close to 9 o'clock, so if there's any motion to extend the time.
We're going to need time to elect a new chair, so maybe till 9:15. I move that.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Hill McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay.
Time for discussion? Well, I found Nick Peterson's and Lucinda Young's comments to be really helpful. And I may be synthesizing them, oversimplifying them a little bit, but try to find the block where you need the fewest approvals, because the odds are that there might be one person in there who says no. So if you can find a block where you have to get yes from 20 people rather than 50 people, prioritize that. That's the deliverability thing. I'd like to add from my own experience, Albany's building codes can be quite a constraint. So after you pick out a few blocks, you might want to maybe talk to Nick Brown about what the options would be for locating heat pump compressors before you go any further. I had a hell of a time at my property. Thank you.
Personally, I guess I see this as a wonderful opportunity for the DOE to pay for a lot of work we want to do anyway. And the two things I see them paying for here are outreach about electrification, what it is, why to do it, how you get it done. Like, we wanted, it's on our list of things to do this year, and they're going to pay for some of that, so that's great. And then the second thing is the analysis coming in year two, which is also work that has to happen with multifamily dwellings. Like that's also been on our radar of, we really need to understand better, like, how we propel conversion in the multifamily dwellings, and what the impediments are, and what incentives can be placed and so forth. So that's all work that we wanted to do anyway that's getting paid for by this grant, and for that reason, I would like to see the outreach go to all 12 blocks, because that accomplishes more outreach, essentially, more of what we're trying to do. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't, like, figure out what our priorities are among them, but I would certainly like to see the consultant begin by reaching out to all the blocks. And once they've provided some basic information, like a FAQ, a webinar, the first round of, like, what is this? And everyone on those 12 blocks knows what this is. I would propose that they would need to do, like, could do a quick straw poll, like, who's the most interested? Because I think the most strategic thing to do is to work with whichever block has the most interest. And we're conjecturing here that maybe one group might have more interest than another group, but we could actually just ask them once they have the information. And then it might be an easy win. There might be some block that steps forward, and maybe they all know each other and they're ready to go. And then we save a lot of money. Those are my thoughts.
Can you put the slide back up that had the three circles with the...
With lots and lots of circles.
Katie, I think that has a lot of merit, what you said. Yeah, it was like, it's like so often we have these dilemmas of like, oh, the easiest access is the highly affluent and the ones that can afford it anyway. The ones who really want to reach are the ones that are hardest to reach and hardest to convince. So anyway, yeah, that multifamily building one in the middle is tempting, right? I mean, you get a lot more electrification sockets that way. But there's a lot of renters that you never know what you're going to get with the building owner. It's always tough.
I think I might be bummed if we did only single families, because we're already doing so much to support single-family conversions. So I'd like to see something that includes multifamilies.
I'm just trying to figure out if it's that Goldilocks principle, like, you know, the one that's in the middle is the one that's just right. I don't know, but that seems a good place to start. But I agree with your sentiment. You know, like cover all of them and take a straw poll. That seems like you never know what you're going to get. So.
Yeah, I think where I'm landing is, one, I think the equity component is extremely important, and I think even a localized study on what are the barriers specifically in Albany will be a useful blueprint going forward, because we do need to electrify every single building in Albany, so we can get headway there and introduction to what those, I guess, conversations going with anyone there. I think that's important. I also do think, I would like to see this succeed. So I guess where I'm thinking, at least where right now on the deliverability side, I guess it seems like the smaller amount of decision makers we have to convince, the higher chance we have like succeeding. So I guess for me personally, something that has a good mix of kind of the population of Albany in building types and income types in a block and is on the smaller side seems to be able to capture a lot of the benefits of capturing the diversity of like situations and barriers we might run into and have a higher chance of succeeding.
Were you looking for, like, based on this chart, like saying, if we were to say, first priority that we would see is, let's say, the high renter population bubble in the middle, and then the second one is the one on the right, and the third one is the multifamily buildings. Is that level of direction you're looking for?
It's hard to say. There isn't a specific answer, but I think, it could be something like that, or it could be something like, I've heard a few people say we want to focus on multifamily buildings, and we, also want to make sure, it could be something like we want to do outreach to all 12 and focus more on the multifamilies, or something like, equity is our first priority, but also try to find the ones that have the smallest number of building owners, like what Troy said, or some mix of those things. So it could be kind of, not specific to the letters we have on here or the bubbles. It could be a little bit more vague than that, or it could be like, we like the middle bubble because it has, this mix of things that we like. So you could go in a few directions. I think, the conversation is good, and I think trying to kind of come to something of a consensus, some level of vagueness that breeds consensus is ideal.
Do you have a percentage in mind for how much of the 200K should be spent on outreach, straw polls, et cetera?
We have estimated that about half of it will go to the outreach consultants and half to the building analyses, which isn't exactly the perfect split because the building analysis consultants will also be engaged in some amount of outreach and other things. So yeah, we're not exactly sure, but something like that.
And the 50% for outreach, does that include the negotiations?
Yes. Yeah.
And does anybody have any idea how much outreach costs per block?
The ask for the grant was based on an assumption that we would start with intensive outreach on 3 to 5 blocks. That was kind of how we did some estimates. They're very rough estimates, though, so it's pretty hard to say. And that's part of the reason that, we don't necessarily want to get into too much detail tonight because we're still going to be kind of figuring out what we can do with this amount of money. But that's not to say that you can't suggest doing outreach to more blocks at once. It would just be a strategy decision on how exactly we're going to be spending the money. But it's all a bit up in the air, which makes it tricky, I know.
Well, is there, building on Katie's idea, is there a way to have a real simple first letter with asking each person, if things work out right, would you be willing to consider, and then thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yeah, that would be relatively inexpensive for sure, and we could do it. I think, there are questions that come up with that approach if maybe there's a concern about getting a no before we've had a chance to really educate people on the project and the benefits. Or, you might have a whole lot of enthusiasm from the blocks with a lot of single-family homes that are owner-occupied, because those are probably the people more interested and more paying attention to these kinds of things. So there's a danger there of this being kind of drawn down that path. But there's also a benefit of seeing who's interested in going in that direction. So, there's positives and negatives. It's definitely something we can do with the money. So if you think that's the right move, I would encourage you to put it into your recommendation.
I'd maybe flip it just a little bit, but the very first screen is to find out if any blocks have one person who's adamantly opposed. Because maybe you could do that without spending a whole lot of money, implement Katie's approach. Mm-hmm. You should start with every block, as Eric was saying too, you never know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to encourage people to give a thumbs down, but if there's any people there who say, I'm wedded to my gas stove or whatever, so that's an idea.
I think if we were to do something like that, just an initial outreach letter or informational thing, I'd want to make sure property owners knew those two, like the what's in it for me. If I'm not already motivated by climate change, what's in it for me? And so I want to make sure that the information was distributed widely, that we do have bans coming up in our state on gas appliances, and I'm not sure that's widely known. So that's a real cost that will accrue to all property owners. So it's great to get a head start on covering that cost. And two, that the cost of gas will increase. I'm not sure how widely that's known either. And so I think you have to know those two things, as well as the climate impacts, before you can make an informed thumbs up, thumbs down. Not that thumbs up or thumbs down is like a commitment, but.
In the interest of moving this forward, they are hiring consultants, so I think that, the detail stuff is, those are great ideas. The consultants are, I'm sure, going to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly how this is done, but I thought your point about, getting this information out to everyone is in the interest of the climate action plan. So I thought that's maybe a good item to include in the recommendation to City Council. And then maybe we could just spend a minute or too, just seeing if we have, any ideas on, like, I think the ask was, what's our direction on priority? And, I mean, the one, to me, in the middle, the high rent population and accessible building, I mean, not, ADA accessible, but, like, approachable buildings, seems like the center bubbles just kind of stick out to me as the first priority. Because you get a nice blend of equity and accessibility. That's just, I don't know if I'm thinking about it wrong, but that seems like the first priority, but to Katie's point, cover everybody as well, so everybody gets the information. Straw man, right there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the middle one is practical for all the reasons you mentioned.
Maybe I didn't, what was the part about accessibility you were talking about?
Gaining access to the building owners and having some chance at a yes. That's kind of what I was, that it's a hard one because multifamily buildings, I don't really know the mindset of the owners. And the one on the far right is probably, homeowners. So we already know that they're where they are. But the middle one is kind of like a nice mix of dense population, probably some equity. I don't want to make too much assumptions there, but it feels like a group that would be open to the conversation. More, I don't know.
Talking about number, or A with letter A.
Yeah, AGF.
Yeah, so to cover again what is kind of going on in that bubble, these are blocks where we have a high renter population and relatively small number of units. A has single-family buildings. G and F have multifamily and single-family. There's just smaller buildings and less of them, so it's a smaller number of units. I can share the spreadsheet if that's helpful as well, to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. So this is A. It's all single family, 70% renter occupied, about 25 buildings, 30 units. And then G and F have some single family, some multifamily, 20 or 30 units, 80% renter occupied. So that's sort of what's similar about them. So they've got the renter and some multifamily that kind of contributes some of the equity component, but then they're also a bit more deliverable because it's a smaller number of units and building owners that we're talking about. So that's kind of the idea. And I think you wouldn't, you could recommend going for the bubble, or you could talk about it more as like, are you really focusing on renters and multifamily and also not a huge number of units? Like that could be the priority that you're kind of trying to describe. It sounds sort of like that's what Member Larson is saying, or picking something up. Maybe you don't really care about renters, but multifamily is what your focus is, or whatever. If that clarifies.
Okay, yeah, I like focusing more on the principles than the specific.
You have a proposal?
Like to see the funds go to advance goals of high outreach to members of Albany. We have like to see a focus on deliverability with lower amount of total units, and also think equity is important, with the potential focus on low income and multifamily buildings. And I guess, I'm not sure if we want to include renting or not as a
Okay, so just to clarify, so I got expanding outreach. Do we want to specifically say to all 12 blocks or just more generally?
Yeah, I'd like to say that.
Okay, and then we have prioritizing deliverability specifically with a fewer number of owners and units, or just owners?
Owners are the decision makers, so I'd say just owners.
Okay, fewer number of owners? Troy sounds. Yes? Okay, and then also prioritizing equity, specifically looking at multifamily buildings and higher renter populations? Or just multifamily buildings?
If you're going at all 12, is that really an important decision to make?
I'd say it'd be good to, even if we do all 12, it'd be nice to have a sense of where priorities lie within those. So yeah, knowing whether we think of equity, we're really focused on multifamily and renter occupied, or really if we're just looking at the building type there, which one you think is more important would be good to know.
Can we say both?
Yeah, you can absolutely say both. I just want to know.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there one that seems more important, or we're just looking at both of them?
I guess because it's, oh, go ahead.
I don't really know which is more important, but when I looked at that picture, I'm looking at the left-hand 2/3 of this as the priority. I wouldn't want them to come up and say, okay, great, we're going to go right over to the far right.
Okay. Great. Okay. So you've got outreach to all 12, deliverability with fewer owners and units, balanced with looking at equity with multifamilies and rentals, trying to find blocks that can combine those traits. Does that all sound right? Yeah. Okay. Somebody want a second?
Second.
Great. Okay. Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Hill McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes. We're getting really close to 9:15, so if there are any motions to extend the time?
I'll move to extend the meeting for another 10 minutes.
Second.
Okay. Member Hodges?
Yes.
Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. With that, we can move along to the election of the chair and vice chair. So quickly, the way this works is we will start with the chair election and then separately move on to the vice chair election. First, we'll have a time where everyone can nominate any member of the committee that they would like to be the chair. You can nominate yourself. You can also decline a nomination if you don't want to be the chair. Then we will vote on each nominee, starting with the one who was nominated last. And whoever gets a majority of votes becomes chair. If we get a majority before we get through the list, then we'll just stop. Whoever gets a majority at any point becomes chair. After that, we move on to vice chair. Any questions about the methodology? Okay. We can technically take public comment, although it's not usually done for this kind of item. So, but that would be up to you, current Chair Mohammed.
I think we can just move on.
Okay, great. So, would anyone like to nominate someone for chair?
Yes. I'm sad to see you go. I've seen you perform marvelously at a number of meetings, especially the last one, because of not many people on a really complicated agenda. But for chair going forward, I'd like to nominate Katie Hill McClanahan. I've been in a couple of subcommittees with her, and I'm impressed by her grasp of the big picture and her memory for all of the details. She takes fabulous notes. It's really, really impressive. She also has, you've seen it earlier this evening, she has a really wonderful ability to disagree without being disagreeable. So I think she'd make an excellent chair, and I nominate her.
Member Hill McClanahan, do you accept the nomination?
I do, thank you.
Great. Any other nominations? That'll make this very easy then. So let's go ahead and vote on the nomination of Member Hill McClanahan to chair. Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Milgen?
Yes.
Member Hill McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Congratulations, new chair. So you'll start next meeting. We'll let our current chair continue out just for ease. But congratulations, and thank you very much to Chair Mohammed for your service and for doing such an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and now we'll move on to the vice chair. Same process goes. We'll take nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Troy Hodges.
Troy, do you accept the nomination?
Accept.
Any other nominations? All right, wonderful. Voting on Member Hodges for vice chair. Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Milgen?
Yes.
Member Hill McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
All right, congratulations to new Vice Chair Hodges, and thank you very much to Vice Chair Milgen for your service. We appreciate both of you. Thanks so much for being just really wonderful chair and vice chair and making these meetings go smoothly and agenda setting. Really appreciate your work, and yeah, excited to work with the two of you going forward. Wonderful. Okay, with that, I think we can move along. Take it away.
All right. We can move on to the next item. Which is
We have subcommittee updates. We do have 5 minutes left in the meeting. So we could go through this. We'd probably have to extend in order to have time for public comment, or we could skip it for next meeting and move along to future agenda items. Committee's decision.
I'd be in favor of skipping it.
yeah, I think we should skip it.
Great. Okay. Future agenda items then.
Are there any requests for future agenda items?
I'd like to talk for 40 seconds or so at the next meeting about my inquiries to BART about putting a row of rapid chargers on Masonic Avenue. So it'll just be a very brief informational item.
The Home Electrification Subcommittee is talking about doing outreach for an event in April, so it might be nice to bounce our ideas off of everybody in March, as they will need to have been completed by the end of March. It doesn't give a lot of time left, but I think it would be important to hear from the whole committee on that.
All right. Anything else?
We do have a hand up for public comment. We have 4 minutes left on our timer here. We could reduce the public comment time or leave it at 3 minutes if we think we're very fast.
I think we can just leave it if there's only one.
Yeah, I think we just have one.
That's fine. We can go ahead and move on to public comment.
Public comment, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. I'll make it quick. This is Nick Peterson. So I'd still like to see the point of listing mandate be something that the committee discusses and moves forward to, because it sort of sets the stage for something that's going to happen and be required for existing buildings. We really don't have any policies in place for requirements for electrification of existing buildings. So that's one. And then the other is I would like to see you guys discuss the police cruiser EV pilot project. I think it'd be good to have a subcommittee looking into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting will be March
20th.
20th. Thank you.